everybody. Thanks for coming. This is The Industrial Revolution Starts at Home. As we all know, the DIY scene has really exploded over the last couple of years, and things like 3D printing are coming down in price and becoming much more common. And it seems like we're approaching a day when anybody's going to be able to simply print out whatever they want at home. And there's probably no three people in this world more qualified to discuss this emerging scene than the people with me here today. Why don't you take a minute, introduce yourselves, tell people to do. Would you like to start?
Okay. My name is Ben Heckendorn, or Ben Heck. I do a web technology show, and I also prototype for individuals and companies for a living.
My name is Mark Frauenfelder. I'm the editor-in-chief of Make magazine. It's a technology project magazine that has been around for 10 years now, unbelievably. And I'm also an editor at Boing Boing, which is a pop culture and technology website.
My name is Ayah Bdeir, and I'm the founder and CEO of Little Bits, who you just heard me talk about a minute ago.
Done that a couple of times now. Let's start with you. Before you were the CEO and founder of Little Bits, you were also an artist, and you had to make your way into this scene through another way. What inspired you to sort of get into this? What made you get started with making and getting involved in the DIY scene?
So I have a background in computer engineering. That's what I did as an undergrad. I actually didn't want to be an engineer. I wanted to be a designer, but my parents and my teachers said that I owed it to myself because I was good at math and science to be an engineer. And so I did engineering, and I really hated it. And I found that it was very constraining, and it was very dry, and there was no creative output. And then when I graduated, I found the Media Lab at MIT, where I then did my master's, and that's when I discovered that you could bring together electronics and art and design and really create artwork and innovative products, combining technology and creativity. And so that kind of really inspired me to start to make my own things. I would do interactive installations, I would do lighting installations, I would do wearable technology. And then at one point, I felt that it was, I started to get more interested in the tool than the actual work. And so I decided to make Little Bits in order to enable other artists, other designers, other business people, and other people who are not engineers to be able to use electronics in a creative way.
And Mark, clearly something led you to make at some point. What was that? What drove your desires?
Yeah, I think starting early, my dad's an electrical engineer, and so he would do a lot of projects. He was a big Heathkit aficionado, and he was building all his own stereo equipment, building his own TVs, fixing everything around the house. That was a big inspiration. I mean, we would work on projects together. And then I also got kind of swept up in the print zine revolution of the 1980s. And I love the idea of being able to make your own media, your own magazines and things like that, and that graduated into doing things online and doing online zines, which turned into weblogs. And after doing that kind of DIY media for a while, I then kind of noticed all these other people like creating their own things, physical things, and looking at the world as a kind of hackable platform. And that was really exciting to me. And so that's how I got involved with that.
And Ben, a lot of the people here probably know you best from your various portable consoles that have been featured on our site many, many times. So what got you there? I mean, it's hard to imagine that you woke up from a dream one day and went, you know what the world needs? A portable Atari 2600.
I also had a background in art. I was a graphic artist, so I had the skills to do layout and make things look nice. And I also would do industrial design for like mechanical signs and fixtures. So I'm like, hey, as a hobby, as a project, I could use some of this equipment at the place where I used to work, and I could make these cool things using electronics. And I just kind of did it as a hobby, and then I put it on the internet, the great democracy, as I like to call it, and everyone's like, wow, this is so cool. And then I was like, wow, kind of like you meant with the print zine, it's like there's actually an audience for this. It was very surprising that, and this was like 13 years ago before the Make movement really started. I mean, there was the internet, but the resources were very limited to what they are now. And so that kind of dragged me into it, and then I eventually just started doing that kind of stuff for a living.
So, clearly the discovering that there was an audience for it in this community there was big in continuing to drive you. And we've really seen the community really start to take off. How integral is that community? How important are they as a support factor for other people who want to be doing this?
Is that
for anybody who wants to take it?
Well, I think I mean, it's incredibly important, the community, and not only because other people are so important in helping you get information about your project, but just getting that many people focused in a community of practice has shot up the innovation and evolution of design curve like crazy. For example, like any area you can imagine, like one thing I like to do is build cigar box guitars. And if you think of the history of cigar box guitars, for the first 100 years or so, the way that cigar box guitars have changed and evolved and innovation in that field has been very flat curve, a little bit. As soon as a lot of people started getting together and seeing what other people could do, being able to iterate quickly, share plans and ideas, components, sources, the innovation curve has shot up, and people are like making incredibly cool cigar box guitars now using materials that no one would ever have thought of before. You can see that with everything: espresso machines, do-it-yourself drones, other kinds of robotics, all those kinds of things. Innovation curve has just shot up like crazy, and I think that's because of the online community, communities of practice who are non-local, being able to get together and share these ideas very easily.
As far as community, I have another point to make with that. You know, back in the 80s, which we can all remember, you know, there was a stigma against computer geeks and whatnot, even though they eventually all became millionaires. But, you know, it was kind of like this geeky thing you do at home in your room alone. And you're like, you know, it was very, you know, insular, isolated. But now the community's there. People are like, wow, it's okay to do this. This is a career path. This is a cool hobby now. So the community has made that happen as well, which psychologically is great for people that want to get into it, especially young kids who are much more impressionable.
Absolutely.
Is there still room for this community to grow, and how do you continue to make it? How do you attract new people to this?
Sorry.
No, go ahead, Ayah.
So that's something that we think about a lot, a little bit, is that how do we speak outside the choir? So we know that there's a community of makers. We know that they're tight and they know the resources to go to, and they're, you know, they have a propensity to want to be makers and breakers when they're kids, and they want to modify things, and they have parents that are supportive usually of that. And so it's a particular type of person, but that's what I call the choir. And so what we try to do is speak to outside the choir, the kids that don't know that they want to learn electronics, or don't know that they should, or don't know why they should, or even adults and designers who say, I'm not a techie, or I'm not into technology, or I'm not a creative type. A lot of these people who consider themselves to be outside this community, I think actually would be really interested in being part of the community, but we're just not talking to them enough. So what we do a little bit is we try very deliberately to make electronics accessible and attractive to outside this choir. And as a result, we've gotten much younger kids involved, but also people from disciplines that would never have thought of themselves as geek really discover that, you know what, actually I love really geeking out on electronics, and I can do all sorts of things for my business with it, or I can do things for my art with it, or I can do things for my, you know, I don't know what, different things, my home.
So you're talking about making it much more accessible, but what can we do, I guess, on a broader scale to kind of get those hooks into kids younger? I mean, we've seen like the number of computer science majors and engineers sort of start to decline, and you know, we want to get kids more involved in that. That's clearly where, you know, the future is. How do we get them interested in this?
Well, I think it's happening already, and one of the reasons is the DIY community or DIY movement is creating the kinds of systems and organizations that will bring those possibilities to young people and people of all ages, as Ayah points out. And so the great thing about DIY people is that if they hit a stumbling block, like a school board that doesn't want to introduce STEM or STEAM programs into their school, they just work around it and come up with after school programs, weekend programs, open up their maker spaces to family programs and those kinds of things. That kind of stuff is happening, and I think the projects themselves are contagious. People start to see that, say, wow, that's cool, I want to get involved, I want to make something like that. I have like my daughter's young friends come over and they see me working on a solderless breadboard, and they're attracted to the color of the components, and they think that's cool. And I remember reading somewhere Jerry, help me out, Jerry, the woman who did the Commodore 64 joy.
Oh, Ellsworth.
Yeah, Jerry Ellsworth. As a kid, she thought that electrical components were beautiful, and she just started collecting and making jewelry, and now she's like this incredibly great electrical engineer and designer who is developing these amazing technology things. Just getting people exposed to it is like at least 50% of it, because the natural curiosity of what this stuff is about kicks in.
So I guess for someone who might be a little bit intimidated by the whole thing, where do you start? I mean, that was sort of always one of the things that when I was younger and I was starting to get into it a little bit, I had no idea what to do at first.
I would say, this is kind of an obvious thing to say, but blink an LED. I mean, even when you get like a new microcontroller or a new development for it, the first thing you do is you make an LED blink, and you're like, oh, there, now I know, I know the protocol to use, that my IDE is working correctly. And so, that's true even, when you know what you're doing, or you think you know what you're doing at least. And so even with, when you start out, it's like it's visceral. You can see a bunch of, oh, here's a schematic and here's the analysis, whatever. It's like, oh, look, I made that LED blink. I made that motor move. And for kids, as you mentioned, bringing young people into it, a tangible, visceral thing they can see. It's like, I did something and this is the result. And that can get their brain turning right there. It's all about, that can be the hook, just like, cause and effect. So, and then just people, that's what we try to do on my show, is make people realize it's not magic. A lot of people think it's magic. It's not, there's a rhyme and reason to it, and just ease people into it and make them not afraid to try.
It's amazing what you see, like even wiring up a little light bulb to a battery. When a kid does that, that sense of ownership in that flashlight they built, they value that thing much more than more sophisticated electronic toys or off-the-shelf flashlights. And I think that's a big part of the maker movement, is that when you create something, it becomes part, you start to get control over the human design world around you, and you have a say in it. You're participating in it rather than being just a consumer of it. And I think the stuff that Ayah is doing is like an amazing introduction for people to get a sense of what electronics can do.
What we like, one thing that we decided very early on is that Little Bits was gonna, for the first part of the platform, be untethered, that you don't require a computer to make it work, so that everything, these blocks are completely independent and they're self-contained, and you snap them with magnets and you can start making things without having to go to a computer or to write a line of code. And so one of my favorite things to do is when we go out to Maker Faire, when we go out to other exhibits, and we have the demos up and things are happening, you usually have two types of kids, actually not only kids, two types of people. Some that are more sort of forward, more proactive, that will see something happening on a table and right away will come close and will start to touch things and put them together and really experience them. And then the larger part of people are the ones that are more skeptical, kids included. You have the skeptical kids that are sort of, walking by, but they're looking from far and they're not wanting to come close. And so all we need to do, and all we've been doing, is we tell them, just come closer, take these two bits and snap them. That's all you have to do. Just snap them. It literally takes 1 second. And as both Ben and Mark said, when the light comes on and they realize that they made that happen, you know and you see in their eyes that something in their brain changed. Something has been transformed because they realize that, oh, I'm the one that made this happen. I wonder what else I could make happen. And then suddenly they're hooked and they are doing all these other things. So we try to bring the threshold down really, really low, but then continuously try to work on, like, how do you make the ceiling higher so that they can make complex things and they don't like reach a block where they're like, okay, this is the extent of my knowledge. We try to keep it, more and more complex so that they can make things that are programmable or that have timing or logic or different things.
And I think that's a kind of a natural thing about making, is you start to get comfortable at a skill, and then you just raise the bar yourself to accept a new challenge. And you kind of, there's that sweet spot where, where you need to learn a little bit more to be able to get to the next level. And once you do that, what else can I do? And it's like self-directed learning. It's like
and that's where the community becomes even more important, because there's a moment when that kid or that adult even decides that they want to do something else, and they know that they're taking a risk, and they have an idea that's bigger than their current skill set. And if the community is there to help them through it, or to provide support, or even have information online, it becomes really kind of your buffer, and then you venture into something harder.
So I'm sure a lot of people here are familiar with that, joy when you make the light blink and you first do that sort of thing, and it is very addictive. but what are the practical advantages of like building these things yourselves? If I can go to a store and buy something that does more or less the same thing for a reasonable price, and I don't have to eat up a couple of hours of my day tinkering around and potentially failing to build something, is there practical gains to making these things yourselves?
I interviewed Martha Stewart a few years ago for Wired magazine, and I kind of asked her the same question. I said, you can buy a blueberry pie that tastes really good and costs a lot less and saves you time than if you go out and buy all the ingredients, take it home and everything. She's like, no. You don't own a pie unless you make it. And I think you can say a lot about the technology that you have around. You don't really own it unless you kind of understand it and make it yourself. And I'm a huge consumer of technology. I love iPads and gadgets that you really can't open without breaking. But the things that I can make myself, you have that sense of ownership over it and a little bit of control. There's so much in this world that we don't have control over. The economy, you can't do anything about it. Really can't do much about politics, or the way the world is going. But there are certain areas in the world where you can control things, and making your own stuff is one of those. And so being able to kind of customize the environment that you have, that you typically are buying solutions to every problem, every need, having that alternative develops, you gain a sense of self-efficacy. So once I do something like rewire my thermostat when it went out, I feel like, all right, I may be able to tackle on something else. So I installed a dishwasher. A lot of times you screw up, smash your finger, all those kinds of horrible things happen, but you just accept mistakes as part of the process. And you start to gain this sense of, I have a little more control over the world around me, and it's a very powerful feeling. And I think even though it's more expensive to do things yourself, almost in every case, what you get out of it is worth a lot more.
Yes, well put. As you said, versus buying the stuff, certainly, as a maker, there are a lot of times when it's a lot faster to buy something when you're trying to achieve a different end result. But if you're doing it, I would say, most people will start this as a hobby, obviously. And I like to call it the ship in the bottle thing, sitting around weekend after weekend, like 50 years ago, like an old guy might do this, building a ship in a bottle. It has no practical purpose, but you're developing your fine motor skills, you're doing something you enjoy. So yeah, even if the thing you're making or building has no practical purpose outside of your own enjoyment, still the fact that you're making it is very valuable for you. And it makes you feel good, and you're learning things in the process. But then, yes, when you get to the point where you might be doing a Kickstarter, like with the things we were judging, then you do need to think more about, yes, is there practicality? But it's starting out. It's fine to make things that have no real purpose because it's fun. I don't know who said it, but mankind will always use its highest technology to amuse itself, and making is a good example of that.
I totally agree with what you guys are saying, and I almost think that it's. At the risk of sounding activist, I think it's our duty. I think we have to do this because everybody, and I see this all the time with people that are involved in technology or not, everybody's a little uncomfortable with how fast technology is going and how fast it's invading our lives. And your TV is telling you what episode you should watch next, and your lights are responding to when you come in, and Google knows too much about you. Everybody's a little uncomfortable with it, but we are not really doing anything about it. And I think that it's our duty to do that, because if we don't take ownership of technology, it's going to take ownership of us. And so we're going to, before we know it, be walking around in this life where literally robots are controlling our life and our environments, and we're just passive bystanders. What's the word?
Bystander.
Oh, that. And so we have to participate, and so we have to flip this dynamic. And it's almost like the financial industry, where we left the financial industry, to its own devices and to the experts that knew what they were doing, and then suddenly one day it collapsed and the world fell apart, and we were like, oh shit, actually I should have understood what finance was. And so now it's the same thing with technology. If you don't understand what it is, it's going to happen again. And I think we, whether or not you like it, I think you have to give it a chance, because we have to save humanity.
Well, there's another point you can take from that. If we do let it get that far, it's just going to become, there are going to be makers and the consumers, and there'll be there already is, many people who have no idea how these things are done, where they come from. They have no idea. All they can do is consume it and pay money. And yes, if they can be empowered, they can, even if they are still just consuming, they can make better decisions about how they consume. Just like with the financial stuff you mentioned.
Yeah.
And I think that the maker movement has created this awareness and sense of discovery among people that goes beyond making, so that people are starting to see how the world works in many ways. And as a result, we are starting to see the end of organizational advantage. Those things that typically would require a very large organization with a lot of resources to be able to do, people can now make things that rival what looks like would come out of a consumer electronics company, because makers have developed these DIY alternatives to research and development, to prototyping, to manufacturing things, to getting their projects funded, to marketing them, to distributing them. There's all these low-cost DIY alternatives to all of these things, so that people can kind of distribute this, do it on their own or in small groups, and produce really cool stuff inexpensively, iterate and innovate quickly, and compete with large companies that are saddled with huge capital costs and recurring costs just to support the organization itself. It's like all this dead weight they're having to pay for. So DIY has like spread out into the rest of the world in a big way. It's pretty amazing. I don't know where it's going to lead, but I'm excited about it.
And also, large companies like the Titanic, you know, it can't turn on a dime. It's very slow. But DIY, right in a dime.
Very nimble.
If it needs a change, it can very quickly.
Yes.
I was going to say, it speaks to both. You're saying that we need to take back sort of control of our technology. By doing things this way, we're sort of taking control of the end result as well. And these smaller productions, you can deliver a much more customized experience, it seems. I mean, Ben, you've done a number of projects that are, carefully tailored for individual people and stuff like that, things that you can't produce on a larger level. I mean, that's got to be attractive in a way, right?
Actually, I can speak to that a little bit. So I do a lot of work with accessibility, and it started several years ago. When someone was injured in the Iraq War, they lost a limb and they couldn't play Xbox. And I mean, if you don't have two arms, it's hard to play video games. And it was like, oh yeah, I never even thought that would be an issue until it was brought to my attention. Then since then, I've made many, many, many iterations of that, and I'll be making next-gen versions here in a couple weeks. Oh yes, I did have a point there. And I had feedback from some of the gaming companies, and it wasn't that they necessarily were aware. I mean, obviously they knew that there were people with disabilities that could use this stuff, but it was like the percentage of people, it's too small for a large company, and it's as an economical thing. It's mathematics. It's not malice. But makers like such as myself in that case, I can fill that niche of a lot of people need it, but it's too small of a market for large companies. So myself or anyone else, they can step in and say, hey, I can solve this problem using my special skills and almost on a per case basis. And it costs more for them. It's too bad that people couldn't get it for less. But still, it's available because of makers.
So is that maybe the next step for the maker movement? Is in a way a commercialization where you have smaller, localized. We have the makers, and then you have the consumers, like you say. But instead of turning it from a hobby and turning it into a business, do what you do.
I mean, that's how I started, really. I mean, when I first started Little Bits, there was no Kickstarter or Indiegogo, so there wasn't a method to kind of crowdfund or even promote or anything like that. But the very first versions of Little Bits were literally a project that I made as a consultant to a design studio that wanted to get their industrial designers to be able to prototype earlier on with electronics. And so they hired me to teach their designers electronics. And then very quickly, we noticed that the designers didn't want to learn electronics. They just wanted to use them in their foam prototypes. And so Little Bits was just a prototype, just a tool for them to integrate into their prototyping process. And then I left it on my desk, and suddenly people would pass by, was like, oh, it's cool, oh, it's cool, oh, it has magnets. And then I put it on my blog. Lamore Freed wrote about it on her blog, and then the next thing, I think Engadget Yeah, Engadget actually picked it up from Lemoore, and suddenly I was receiving orders from all over the world for people that wanted to buy it. And this was like a one-off on my desk that I literally had no intention of making more of. And that gave me the energy to want to really solve this problem. It took some time. It took about 3.5 years to get the first versions of Little Bits prototypes and made by factory, because when you're making something that doesn't exist, it takes time to make it. But every once in a while, kind of people emailing and saying, oh, I want this, or it's cool, re-energizes you to continue. And 3.5 later, I started a company.
So I guess are we moving towards a world where we're just going to have a lot less mass-produced stuff in our lives, and we're going to have more small batch items, so to speak?
I could definitely see that happening. I mean, you have desktop manufacturing technology that's becoming more and more affordable. So you have things like 3D printers, laser cutters, CNC routers. We saw that really cool DIY wire bending tool, which opens up a whole new world of fabrication. So you have all of these things that are almost affordable to individuals and certainly to small groups of people. And so small lot manufacturing is definitely possible, and high quality too. That could even possibly beat the way things have been being made recently. I think back to many years ago, I was a mechanical engineer doing disk drive design. And in the early stages, we would do things like make form and fit prototypes out of hogged out aluminum or plastic stock. So I would design a part on a really clunky late 80s 3D system, put the file on a floppy disk, drive across town to a model shop. The guy would stick it into his computer that was like, the case was off, and he had all these fans blowing on it, and he would generate the tool paths from the file and say, oh, you made a mistake here. I'd drive back, work a couple of hours on it, come back. He would say, okay, come back in 2 weeks. I would come, I'd get this part hogged out of Delrin or aluminum, and then drive back to the engineering company, and the base plate wouldn't fit on the cover, on the deck. And it's like, oh, of course, I didn't allow for this screw hole or something. Repeat the process all over. Now you have a 3D printer on your desktop. You have a $99 solid modeling system. You design the piece, you print it out on the laser printer. Half an hour later, you try it out. Oh, it doesn't fit. You get that mistake out of the way. You get all of those mistakes out of the way. And that's like what I've been talking about. And Ben, I'm sure, as much more of a maker than me,
oh,
will
yeah,
know
you're definitely
how
right.
important it is. Mistakes are an inevitable part of the process. You just accept them as an engineer or a designer. Get those mistakes out of the way really quickly, and then you can come up with something fast and cool.
I can actually, going from that, you can almost, it allows one person to do parallel tasks and simulate, having more people there. You can be 3D printing something. Of course, 3D printing takes time, but you can be printing one thing while you're working on the next iteration right there at your desk. And then as soon as it's done, you can test it. And what I like to do, it's not really the right way to do it, but when we do our show, we have to do things quickly. You get the thing, you design it one step at a time, because you can so quickly prototype. If you design the whole thing, if you did get something wrong, that could muck up everything. So you design the one thing, make sure it works. Then you design the next, make sure it works. And it's kind of half-assed in a way, but that's the way I like to do it, because you can find the mistakes quickly, and they happen kind of in a serial manner.
Yeah.
And the 3D printing and like the desktop laser cutters allow you to make those mistakes quickly and get them out of the way.
Yeah.
And I think I would add that we know that it's going to happen because it's been happening with other fields as well. I mean, we think about food. We now or a lot of people overpay for food when they know that it's handmade and it's made locally and it's grown locally. And like, I paid twice the cost for a jar of pickles that comes from Brooklyn than I would from a supermarket, because it was made by humans and it was made in a sort of home environment kind of thing. And if I mentioned that to my grandma goes crazy. She would much rather pay for something that comes out of a big company than trust a group of people that are making it in Brooklyn. But we do that in food, and we love it, and in fashion. And so why not electronics? Why not be able to say, you know, this phone or this gadget or this thing that I need at home was made locally and sourced locally and made by human engineers that are problem solving in the room rather than, you know, some big bucks something or other.
Yeah, there's value in that,
Yeah.
especially if you can kind of develop a relationship with that maker personally, just like
Yeah,
knowing
you
the
call
pickle
and then
people in
actually a
Brooklyn.
person
Yeah,
answers. Exactly.
for sure.
So like a couple of years from now, we're going to be locally sourced, organically grown smartphones.
Why not?
We're going to be you mentioned it briefly, so I just want to kind of go back to it quickly. The 3D printing and 3D scanning, and those things have both really started to explode over the last couple of years. The prices have come down. But it still seems, you know, outside of the, you know, really dedicated hobbyist, rapid prototyper, they're having a little bit of trouble catching on. Do you see them becoming something that, you know, even a significant portion of people would have in their home, or is this going to continue to be like a niche product?
Yeah, I don't think it's like one of those a chicken in every pot in every home kind of things.
Yeah.
What'll probably happen is if they did reach a mass market saturation, you get kind of in the Napster effect of like, oh, I'm going to print this thing. You know, something like Thingiverse will be out there, and you know, you wouldn't be designing things; you would just be consuming the files and printing them yourself. And then you do run into the thing. You know, the thing that I think about a lot is, you know, oh no, my shower ring broke. You know, I can spend X amount of electricity and X amount of time and X amount of plastic printing a new one, or the one at Target was made that fast. So it's not really a replacement for everything. You kind of have to have a utility. I've seen comments on Engadget. People like, why do I need a MakerBot replicator? And it's like, well, if you have to ask why you need one, then you don't need one. If you need one, you know it, and you see it. Like you see a product, like I like that 3D system scanner. I saw that on Instagram. Like, I know I want that. I know what I could use it for. A lot of people don't necessarily think in that critical manner. So as far as in every home, I don't know if it's, well, of course, you know, maybe someone said that about the refrigerator at one point. But you know what the refrigerator does? It keeps your food cold. It's kind of like a necessary survival kind of thing, you know, not dying from rotten food. But certainly it'll become more mass market. I mean, the 3D systems thing is at Staples now. That's pretty mass market.
Yeah, I think the software has to get a lot better. And I think also the materials, the resolution for home machines needs to be better, the kinds of material choices. I think once we get like sintering of metal-like materials, and then like Ben says, where you can kind of like take your tablet and dial up something you want, a salt shaker or...
Yeah, like tea, Earl Grey, hot, bam, you know.
Yes, exactly, and have it print things to order, modify it a little bit if you want, make the forks smaller or larger, those kinds of things. I think that will come into play more. I'm actually really excited and waiting for laser cutters to become more affordable, because I think there's a world of possibility there. I was at Maker Faire Rome last month, and to see what the Italians do with laser cut wood, making these beautiful enclosures, is pretty incredible. And you can make quite large pieces because you just snap these 2D flat pieces together. Pretty amazing, you know, everything from furniture to electronic component cases, amplifier enclosures, and things like that. That's something I'm really excited about. I can't wait to see what takes off with that. And when I saw that wire bender, I was just thinking of like a combination of CNC routers and inexpensive wood fabrication, and then this kind of metal bending for furniture. You could have like this mid-century modern furniture explosion where people are like making this great stuff at home.
Yeah, that kind of goes to like how many materials, you know, you can do this with your laser. It's great for wood. Plastic obviously is good for the 3D printer. There's your wire. What we really need is some sort of like basically the 3D printer desktop equivalent of PCB manufacturing. I'm sure people are working on it, but whoever figures that out, that'll be like the first $15 million Kickstarter.
Amazing, yeah.
Because it's like, oh wow, if I saw that on Kickstarter, $3,500, here's my credit card.
Yeah.
In a heartbeat.
That would be amazing.
I mean, with software, we're okay having multiple softwares that do different things. I mean, if you think about it, when some of the more high-end Adobe software used to only be on professionals' computers and people and design studios and people who would pay thousands of dollars for it. Now every single person, I mean not every person, so many people have Photoshop and Illustrator on their computer, and it's a given that they want their computer with that. And so it used to be something that we thought was just like a professional purpose, like a 3D printer. Now it's still a little bit in the professional realm, but it's gonna come down so that everybody wants it at home, and you may be okay with having multiple of it because you have Illustrator, you have Photoshop, you have Final Cut Pro. Each one of them does something a little differently, and you're okay with that.
I think what happens is these companies, they basically see money laying on the table, like Autodesk. You know, that's a very expensive solution for 3D modeling, and they're like, this maker movement's really huge. Let's have a really simple app that you can download for free or very low cost, because they realize those are their future customers once they get to professional level. And you know, it's also, you know, if they don't get in that entry level space, someone else will.
So just want to take a quick step back. How much does a laser cutter cost at this point in time?
I think you can get a low-end one for about $2,500, not including like the probably necessary ventilation.
I have one, so I can speak to this. You can basically get one kind of off the boat from overseas for around $2,500, but it won't have any drivers. It basically, you'll have to figure everything out. It'll be like if you want to buy the laser to figure out how to run a laser, that's great. There are companies in America that will take those imported lasers and they will kind of rebrand them, bring them up to snuff, check them out, because sometimes, you know, sometimes they'll ship with the tube will be busted, and they'll give them kind of like a layer of support, a local support. I think it's Fairway or Fairchild that does that. It's something with an F. And those will be around $5,000 to $7,000. And then the American ones like Epilogue or Universal Laser Systems, those are usually $12,000 up to $30,000 for size. I have an Epilogue, it's really great, but yes, it is, yeah, and it won't fit in a desk either, but I love it. And I've had it for 2 years. Once the warranty's up, which is actually next month, I'm going to put a pizza in it, cut a pizza.
Excellent.
But it's rock solid, rock solid. I know it's going to stink and smell terrible, but I'm still going to do it just to say I did it.
Is that something that's realistic to expect the price to come down on, though, or is there a barrier there to getting that?
The laser tubes are very expensive, and the cheaper ones are water cooled, but then of course then you have a water circulation system, and as you mentioned, the smells aren't toxic. They're not going to kill you, but there's certainly, wood is great. Wood smells like a campfire, you know, get out the weenies and the marshmallows, but any sort of plastic is like, ooh.
Yeah, it can be bad. So, well, there might be some kind of limit, but I think it certainly becomes affordable to a dedicated hobbyist to have something like that. And like, for example, one industry that it's kind of overturned is the remote control balsa wood airplane making market. You know, when you make these die-cut balsa wood sheets, you have a tooling cost, and if you need to make a change, you need to change the tooling, which is expensive. But they've all gone to laser cutters, and it's very easy to make a change now, and it's pretty quick to make a sheet of balsa wood and cut out the stuff with the laser.
And the lasers are really, I mean, it's literally a printer on your network. I've accidentally printed my Gmail to my laser before. It's that easy to use. So, I mean, as far as ease of use, and yet everyone understands paper. You know, here's your paper size, which is your bed size. Oh, here, lay out your parts of your airplane. I mean, that's a great application, and then just click print, and then watch out for the fumes.
It's easy to wrap your head around the idea, and the possibilities are pretty amazing with what you can do with it.
It's interesting when you see people wrap their head around the idea of a 3D printer. Because it's hard to believe in this day and age, but there's plenty of people who don't understand it, and they're like, what? I've heard of that, what is it? And then they watch it, and it's like a honey trap. It's amazing. People are just mesmerized by it. I always had this when people visit my shop. And I was really impressed with my mom, actually, who is not very technological at all. You'd be surprised. She fills up an SD card and then buys another one, which actually makes sense. They're so cheap. But so a couple years ago, she was at my shop and she saw my 3D printer. And she's like, I don't understand. And then she was watching it and she's like, oh, it's like that scene in The Fifth Element where they had to rebuild Leeloo Dallas. And I'm like, yeah, it is, but that one's sideways. And I was really impressed that she made that connection. And then when people see it, it clicks in their brain. And once they understand it, then they can figure out like, oh, I could do this, this, and this. So it's all about, yeah, making that light switch go off. Even in older people like parents and kids too.
So one of the things, though, that seems like the barrier is you have to make these things easy to use for consumers. And you mentioned Thingiverse before, and you said that it's very easy to wrap your head around this sort of stuff. And I just kind of want to know what you all think about, if you're just going to Thingiverse and downloading a file and printing it out in your 3D printer at home, are you really still a maker anymore, or are you just a consumer? I mean, where is the line between DIY and just, being a consumer of what happens to be on the internet?
Well, I have a 10-year-old daughter, and we've looked at things on Thingiverse and tried printing out like the whistle and stuff, but she's much more interested in Tinkercad, which was recently acquired by Autodesk, which is a very simple 3D modeling program that generates files for the 3D printer. And she can spend hours and hours on that, designing lockets and keychains and little toys and things like that. So I think that most people do want to have, they find a degree of customization that they're comfortable with. And this is what making offers, is the opportunity to at least modify what you're going to buy in some way. So some people, that's as far as they'll ever go. That's fine. I'm not an evangelist that's trying to change them. I would rather just introduce people to what's possible and let them find what they want to do in that area.
At least in the process, they know what it took to make that thing, which I think is interesting. I once heard an anecdote that was kind of traumatizing, where a parent was talking to their kid about wanting to go apple picking or something, and the kid didn't know that apples came from trees. That kids thought that she thought that the apples came from a supermarket, and that's where apples come from a supermarket. Like, okay, what's before the supermarket? And so, like, I think it's at least if you get people to understand that, to make that whistle, you went through a process of combining materials, and there's a tool and whatever. Yeah, you took the file from Thingiverse, you didn't design it yourself, but at least you now understand that the whistle was just not there.
It didn't just materialize.
Yeah, it didn't just appear out of thin air.
Gives you a sense of awareness and kind of an appreciation for what other people, how good they are doing
what they
things.
go through,
Like
yeah.
if I've made furniture before, like chairs that are really crappy, but then you get a newfound appreciation for the world around you and how people make chairs, and you look at how other chairs are fabricated. It makes you more aware of the world around you.
Yeah.
All right, I think that's probably as good a place to end it as any. Thank you very much, guys. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.